Ooh, somebody stop me from just constantly quoting this movie during this episode. On this episode of Moving Panels, we discuss The Mask. Welcome to Moving Panels, the podcast where we discuss movies and TV shows based on, inspired by, and adapted from the world of comic books. I'm your host, Laramy Wells, and joining me in the co-host chair, is it fate? Is it meant to be? Is it written in the stars that we are destined to fraternize? I'd like to think so. It's Tim Williams.
Smokin'.
I mean, this is such a quotable movie. Do you think we can make it through this episode without just quote after quote?
Probably not.
I don't think so either. I really don't. I mean, it's amazing. I'll ask you this in a minute. Mm-hmm. It's been a few years since I've seen this movie.
Yeah.
But as I was watching it to prepare for this, I was sitting there just pretty much quoting along with the movie, saying the dialogue. I don't know if there's much I missed. But yeah, it is. Oh, man, I watched this movie so much as a teenager. So I'll go ahead. So the movie did come out July 29th of 1994. We are talking about The Mask, just to remind everybody, even though you just heard it in the intro with Jim Carrey. But again, it came out in July 29th, 1994. It had been a few years. I don't know exactly how many years. But again, it was like I had just seen it for the umpteenth time because I knew everything. How about you, Tim? When was the last time you saw it?
So I had just rewatched it when we were doing one of our brackets about comic book movies. So it was on the list. So I rewatched it then. So it's been within the last probably 6 months to a year. But before then, it had probably been a couple of years. So it's one that I haven't watched a whole lot. I have a funny story. When we talk about my first time watching it or like that history.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So I went to see it at the theater, and I loved it. I was a huge Jim Carrey fan. I was so excited about it. And then I think when it came out on video, I rewatched it, and for some reason, it didn't land with me as much as it did the first time. And I was like, man, why did I think it was so fun? I don't know if it's because in a full theater, and you hear the laughter of other people, and you're kind
the
of
atmosphere.
The atmosphere.
Yeah.
And so I was like, man, maybe it's just like a good one-time watch. And then like 2 or 3 years later, it was on cable one night. And I was like, well, I'm probably going to fall asleep. And I started watching it. And then I like fell in love with it all over again. I was laughing at all the jokes. Like, I guess it just needed some time to like be fresh in my mind again. So I've kind of had that thing about, well, maybe it's only funny like late at night when I'm like not, I'm kind of in that loopy state of about to fall asleep. But even when I rewatched it the last time, it still holds up pretty well. I mean, it's very cartoonish. It's Jim Carrey just being Jim Carrey. So I think you kind of have to know what you're going into to kind of enjoy it for what it is. And I think that's watching it this time. Like I have to remember, like, okay, this is not Ace Ventura. It's not Dumb and Dumber. It's a completely different type of Jim Carrey performance, and just embracing the lunacy of it and the cartoonish parts of it. You just enjoy it for what it is.
Yeah, and this was the year of Jim Carrey. Because Ace Ventura had come out in February. Mm-hmm. This came out in July, and then Dumb and Dumber would come out in December.
Yeah. Yep.
So, the primary movies that I think most people associate with prime Jim Carrey were all in 1994.
Yeah. He was very busy.
It's crazy. Yeah. I know. I didn't mention that. I actually saw this one in theaters. Mm-hmm. This is one I remember seeing in theaters. I loved it. I got it on VHS. Mm-hmm. I even remember when in high school I was in band. We took a trip to Virginia, and we were on one of those charter buses that had the VCR.
Oh yeah,
in the front.
Yep, I remember those.
The monitors throughout the bus.
Yep.
And we were told we could bring our own movies, and I brought The Mask, and that was one of the movies we watched on our trip to Virginia. But yeah, so for those of you who may not know, this is based on a comic book. It is based on a Dark Horse comic. It does, if you pay attention at the opening, it does say Dark Horse Entertainment. Mm-hmm. So this is based off of a Dark Horse comic that ran from 1991 to 1995. They did bring it back later, but it was kind of watered down at that point. So they were still making this comic as the movie came out and continued to kind of finish out out that story. The original trilogy was compiled together, the first part being The Mask, which is the Stanley Ipkiss story, which we'll talk about later in the moving panels. Then the second part is called The Mask Returns. And then finally, it's the third part of the trilogy is called The Mask Strikes Back. That one gets a little zany. You could definitely tell that one. You could definitely tell that third one got some influence from the movie.
Yeah, gotcha.
If you read through that one, but like I said, there's been spin-offs. They've had the Mask. They did a Mask Joker crossover.
Oh wow, okay.
With DC. Yeah, I've never read that one, but I know again that the later Masks, the character definitely is closer to the movie because the original Mask comic book is so violent.
Yeah. I think I remember reading that.
Yeah. Extremely violent, extremely dark and gruesome. But we'll of course talk about that throughout and get into probably more detail with it into the moving panels. But yeah, they decided to make a movie. And because the comic was so dark, Dark Horse, who owned the character, they approached New Line Cinema and they wanted to do essentially a horror film with it.
Yeah.
And because the character is very similar in the comics, you could almost say the character is very similar to Freddy Krueger.
Okay.
And of course, New Line Cinema is the house that Freddy built.
Exactly, yeah.
So there was kind of that cross in there. And they brought in Chuck Russell as director, who had actually directed Nightmare on Elm Street 3.
Okay.
The Dream Warriors, which is one of my favorite Nightmare on Elm Street.
Right.
He also did the Blob remake from, what was that, 88?
I think it's 88, yeah.
Yeah, I'm still partial to the Steve McQueen one from the 50s, but I know he directed that. So they were thinking, hey, do something like this, have that comedy, but also that gruesome, that dark horror comedy kind of crossover where you've got the zaniness, but you've also got the scares. And it was actually Chuck Russell who went, no, I think this would work better as a zany comedy, as just a straight up comedy. And so here we have it. We have Chuck Russell, the guy who again directed Nightmare on Elm Street 3 and the Blob remake from the 80s, deciding to make a straight up comedy. Of course, later he'd go on and do action. He did Eraser and the Scorpion King.
I liked Eraser. Scorpion King, not as much, but
yeah. Let's say I will say the visual effects in this movie hold up better than the visual effects in the Scorpion King.
Yeah.
So, what would you have thought though of this? How familiar are you with the comic book?
Not very. I remember reading. I think when I was, anytime I watch a movie, I'm going to read through IMDb's trivia. So I remember reading that it was originally going to be, or like the comic is very violent. Like it's very different than what the comic book character is. So I did know that much, but I didn't read the comic at all. So
then, based solely off of your knowledge of this movie, could you see it being turned into a horror movie? Yeah,
I could. I mean, there's still a few scenes that don't really go dark, but you could see where it could have gone in that direction a few times. I mean, it gets a little bit more of the zany, like when I'm assuming I don't remember, does he kill the guys at the auto shop, or he just like ties
in
them
the comic book he kills them.
Yeah. But here it's more like he just kind of wraps them up in the pipes or whatever. But like at the beginning,
no, he shoves them where the sun don't shine.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So I remember, like scenes like that, like I could see them taking it in that direction. So I can see where they decided not keep it PG-13 and make it more funny, but the scenes like that, I was like, I could see how that could have been. They could have took it the other direction and made it more of a violent movie.
Yeah, I do think though it would have been too Freddy Krueger-esque if they did it.
It would have been compared so much that it probably wouldn't have had the same following or the same success because it's a knockoff of Freddy Krueger and not gotten. Even though like '94, Freddy kind of.
Freddy had already died.
Freddy's
dead
course.
Was what 90?
I think
91
so. Yeah,
was Freddy's
early
dead.
90, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, Freddy had already died. So I do think this would have been they're just trying to do another version of Freddy Krueger. But I knew the plan was to make it a horror movie and make it even a franchise, which I'm sure they also thought that with the comedy. But we're not going to talk about Son of the Mask. Let's move on.
Good, because I never watched it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We might bring that might end up being one of those that where you and Nicholas always joke that I always bring you all on for the really bad movie. That might come up later at some point. But let's go ahead and get into the characters. We got our main character, Mr. Stanley Ipkiss, a.k.a. The Mask, played by Jim Carrey right at the beginning of his career. And this role was just perfect for him. I mean, anyone who had you had seen him in Ace Ventura, but anyone who had seen him throughout In Living Color knew that this man is a human cartoon. And the way he can distort his face, the way he can move his body is just uncanny. And it just really worked because there wasn't an awful lot they had to do. They just had to tell Jim, hey, you need to act like you're doing this. And he essentially could do it. So, but let me point this out to you. I did discover a list of other actors that were considered. So I'm just going to go through the list and then see what your thoughts were. So actors like Rick Moranis, Martin Short, and Robin Williams were suggested. I don't think they were approached or asked, but they were suggested. However, actors like Nicolas Cage and Matthew Broderick were actually considered for the role.
That's interesting.
Your thoughts, Tim?
No.
A young Martin Short. A young Martin Short, a young Robin Williams, I think could have worked.
Yeah.
I still don't think they would have done as well as, and I love Robin Williams. Still don't think they would have done as well as Jim Carrey, but I think they would have worked.
Yeah.
I don't see Rick Moranis.
Yeah, Rick Moranis would have been, very different. I just really can't see Matthew Broderick, especially in the 90s. He can be goofy, but just not the same. It's hard. It's really hard to see somebody else in this role. Like, really hard. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, Nicolas Cage, I'm going to guess that was maybe when they were wanting to go darker.
Yeah, that's what's I could see Matthew Broderick if they wanted to go not that he's really played that dark of a character, but that would have been an interesting change to see him in more of a darker role. He did do Election, but it's not that dark, but just a little different, like it was a dark comedy, but not really dark. So I could see if that was the route they were going. And Nick Cage, I could see him hamming it up pretty much in the violence side, but not the zany comedy side.
Yeah, I think the version we would have gotten out of Nicolas Cage, we got to see in Spirit of Vengeance. The Ghost Rider movie. I think the zaniness he did and the kind of split personality almost that he portrayed there, I think that's what we would have gotten. So did you know that he is not referred to as the Mask in the comic books?
No, I didn't know that. Yeah,
that was something entirely done by the movie to actually name the character the Mask. The comic was called The Mask.
Okay.
But the character himself was actually called Big Head.
Well, I can see why they changed it.
They called him Big Head. So interesting there. All right, let's move on. Our villain, Dorian Tyrell, played by Peter Green, who I always try to think of what else do I know this guy from. He was Zed in Pulp Fiction, which also came out in 1994.
Yeah.
So
he typically plays a bad guy. Yeah.
Oh yeah. He's got that perfect gangster face. No offense to him. It works great for him. However, when he actually gets into mask form, it was not Peter Green.
Oh, of course
it was actually two different actors. Garrett T. Sato, who just seemed to be a fill-in. I don't know if maybe his face was very similar, but maybe he was a little bigger.
Yeah.
However, for the body, Dorian as the Mask was played by Jeep Swenson. Are you familiar with the name Jeep Swenson?
Not at all.
So Jeep Swenson, we have talked about him before. He played Bane in Batman and Robin.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I could see that.
So that's the same guy, same body. So the masked version of Dorian, you then saw 3 years later in a in a movie. That's what we'll call it. As Bane. Then we've got introducing Cameron Diaz as Tina Carlisle. This was her debut. This was her first movie at the age of 21, 22, depending on when they filmed.
Right.
So a very young Cameron Diaz right here. However, if anyone has seen the Annie remake from a few years ago, you know that was not Cameron Diaz singing. It was actually an actress, voice actor by the name of Susan Boyd, who I found out was the voice of Daisy in Rover Dangerfield.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Who remembers that movie?
There's a forgotten flick right there. Yeah.
Yes. But Chuck Russell, the director, actually wanted Anna Nicole Smith.
Yeah, I read that.
And apparently the only reason it wasn't Anna Nicole Smith is because she decided to make Naked Gun 33 1/3.
Which probably fit her acting style a little bit better than this one, I think.
It did. It absolutely did. I do not think I would have liked her in this role. I think Cameron Diaz was great. And of course, that gave us... I mean, think about it. If it wasn't for the mask, we wouldn't have had There's Something About Mary, probably. We wouldn't have gotten her voice as Fiona in Shrek. I mean, come on.
The Charlie's Angels remake and sequel.
Yeah. Now, she is not... I didn't mention Dorian's not from the comics. Tina's not from... There's really only two characters from the comics. And that's Stanley and then Kellaway, the cop.
Right.
But, yeah, Stanley actually has a girlfriend from the beginning in the comic books, but her name is Kathy, and she actually becomes a bigger character than Stanley does. But like I said, I'm going to save the whole Stanley Ipkiss story because that's the main thing I want to focus on in the moving panel. So we will get to that. Next up, we had Lieutenant Mitch Kellaway, who is also from the comics, here played by Peter Reichert. And Peter Reichert, I'm sure Tim already knows this. Peter Reichert was Boone, Donald Schoenstein, I forgot how you pronounce his name, in Animal House.
Yeah, which I've never seen all the way through.
How have you... I get that it was not in the 80s, but how have you never seen Animal House?
I've seen bits and pieces of it, but it's just not one that I've ever actually sat down and watched all of it. I mean, I was way too young to see it as a kid. I mean, so... yeah, I've just one that's just on my blind. It's a blind spot on my filmography, but I'll make sure that I take care of that quickly.
I'm sure there's a lot of people who are screaming at their devices right now.
Kevin Bacon's debut. I mean, you know.
Yeah, Kevin Bacon's debut will always be Friday the 13th with. I don't care about his little military dude, whatever he was in Animal House. All right. Moving on, we got Peggy Brandt, again, made up. Let me state again. Kellaway and Stanley are the only two characters from the comic. So we got Peggy Brandt, played here by Amy Yazbek, who was I think, in the height of her stardom in Hollywood. She was Maid Marian in Men in Tights. Of course, you had seen her in both Problem Child movies, along the man who would later become her real-life husband, the late, great John Ritter. But here she is as the character that you think might be the true love interest for Stanley.
Right.
And then, ends up betraying him. And I do want to ask you this question. Does she die? Because we never see her again, and Dorian's not really the one who's going to let her go to eventually, tell his story. I mean, there is a deleted scene that shows that he does potentially kill her, but based off of what we see here, do you think she dies?
It's a comic book movie, so does anyone really die? I think initially watching it, I thought she did, but I think in watching it over and over again, there's always that little bit of hope that she didn't. But
yeah, it's just that one is because, like you said, no one really dies in this movie. You would even assume that Dorian when he just gets like washed down the toilet thing that the mask creates.
Right.
Like he's gonna be fine later. But she's the one that you almost go, wait a minute. And you say no one dies. Freeze dies. The guy played by Reginald E. Cathy.
Oh yeah,
yeah. He dies as he's trying to smoke a cigarette. I did want to mention him. There's probably several people who recognize him from The Wire or Oz, but he will forever be a member of the PBS show Square One.
Oh, really? Okay.
The math sketch comedy show that PBS used to have called Square One. He was a cast member on that, and that is forever. So just had to mention him really quick, even though he's got a small little part here.
Only a math teacher would know that. Congratulations, Larry.
Look, I'm sure someone else out there remembers Square One. And they remember every episode ended with MathNet, a cop drama that was...
Dragnet spoof.
Yeah, and it was math connected. Also have to mention the completely random comedic best friend, Charlie, played by Richard Jeni, who was one of those stand-up comedians that, oh my God, they tried to push on us here in the early 90s.
Yep.
And it never took off with him.
Yeah.
I do remember seeing him in things. In fact, do you remember his sitcom?
Vaguely. Like, I remember him being like the next great stand-up comedian. Like you said, I remember them trying to like put him in everything. I'm pretty sure that I watched his TV show. Was that Platypus Man? Was that it?
Platypus Man on UPN. It was one of the original sitcoms when UPN launched.
Right.
Yeah. I think it came on either before or after Voyager because they were really trying to push it. So they knew Voyager was the big hit. And so they either put it on before or after to try to get viewers into it. I think it aired along with, there was another show called Pigsty.
I remember that.
I think it aired along with it. Yeah. No,
I'll say I remember the name. I can't say I could tell you anything about the show or what happened in it. But
no, I couldn't either. And the same thing with Pigsty. I remember Pigsty, there was a woman who was like the super of the apartment building. Okay. And the apartment was a bunch of guys, and that's really all I can tell you. But I can't tell you anything about Platypus Man. But apparently it was one of those where Platypus Man was the name of one of Richard Jeni's like comedy specials.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it was trying to play it like they did a lot in that time with comedians. They tried to create something that was all based off of his stand-up. Yeah. And it just didn't work.
Yeah, Tim Allen being like the main
most successful
of those. And Seinfeld later.
Him and Drew Carey.
Yeah.
Drew
Carey. Yeah. Seinfeld. Yeah.
Yeah, I will say, even in this movie, Richard Jeni just feels like he is being shoehorned into this movie. There is no reason for his character, and it doesn't make sense. But we might bring that up a little bit later.
I was going to say
the only other person that I will mention is, of course, the great Ben Stein here playing Dr. Newman. Masks are a thing we wear, metaphorically speaking.
Gotta love Ben
Stein. Let's just go ahead and let's go ahead and get into it. So, of these characters, and if there's someone else, I don't think there really was, but there's Doyle, but
not worth mentioning.
But of all these characters, who do you want to see again, and who do you wish would have time for an overhaul?
Well, because we just talked about it, Richard Jeni could go away. I was already prepared. I was ready for that question because I'm like, even when I rewatched it a couple months ago, I forgot he was in this. And when he popped up, I was like, oh, yeah, there's that guy that used to be a real famous comedian. What's his name again? So, but you hit the nail on the head. He feels so shoehorned. Like, he's got to have some kind of best friend. It's like, it's the trope of, like, the sidekick best friend that's kind of helping him. But he's really not needed. And you can...
He thinks he's cooler than he actually is. Yeah.
And you can tell it's almost like he's just there to like, please let me get some of Jim Carrey's talent. Please let me get some of his talent and let it rub off on me. But it doesn't.
It's almost as if they said, okay, Jim Carrey's an up-and-coming comedian.
Yeah.
Richard Jeni's a little bit more established, so we'll have him as the established comedian. And it didn't work. It didn't work.
Yeah. Who I like to see more of... That's tough. I mean, Stanley Ipkiss. I mean, you know, the Mask is he's great. I mean, but that's the easy answer. Like, he's the main character. Of course, you want to see more of him. I did like Peggy Brandt. I would have liked for her, if she doesn't die, if they did do a for real sequel, I would like to see her. I really would have rather seen her as the love interest than Cameron Diaz. But yeah, that's just me. Maybe
do you think though? I don't disagree with you, but do you think, like, because you mentioned the trope of Richard Jenny?
Yeah.
Do you not think Peggy Brandt, that character, would have been a trope for
sure.
her to have actually been the love interest?
Of course, yeah. Which is why I feel.
Hey, look, who's the love interest of the superhero? The reporter.
Yeah. So kind of a good red herring there for us, but Cameron Diaz is great as well. Like, I mean, I enjoyed her. She's a little irritating at the beginning for me. It took me a while for her to win me over as the character, but she was nice to look at. Especially as a teenage boy, I was very excited about her.
Her character, I'll agree with you though. Her character is very two-dimensional.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they give her a little bit more towards the end, but especially there at the beginning, her character is very two-dimensional. I will say, and I won't explain this too much because we'll get into more of it with the moving panels. I want a little bit more of Kellaway, but I want it the way the comic book gave it. So
understandable.
So I'll explain that one a little bit more later. I mean, yes, Jim Carrey as the Mask. I would have 100% loved more of him, and there'd have been a Mask 2 that wasn't Son of the Mask, and actually did feature Stanley Ipkiss, Jim Carrey. Because we really don't know that he got rid of the mask. Because at the end of the movie, when he throws it, even though Charlie jumps in to get it, we see Milo swim away holding it. So for all we know, Milo went and gave it back to Stanley or something. I mean, I wouldn't see Stanley getting it and then throwing it back. I don't know what he would have done, but let's again, like I said, I'm trying not to talk too much about the comic book here.
But that's what your show is about. Laramy, just do it.
Yes, but that's also really all I have for the moving panels portion. I really want to focus just on the way the movie portrays these characters.
What's up, dudes? I'm Jerry D of Totally Rad Christmas, the podcast that talks all things Christmas in the 80s. Toys, movies, specials, music, books, fashion, and fads.
If it was gnarly during Christmas in the 80s, he's got it covered. Wait, is there a lot of things to talk about for the 80s and Christmas?
Well, you got the movie giants like Christmas Vacation, Scrooged, and A Christmas Story. There are TV specials like Muppet Family Christmas, Claymation Christmas Celebration, and a Garfield Christmas special.
Plus classics shown every year.
You also jam out to Last Christmas, Do They Know It's Christmas, and Christmas in Hollis. But most of all, it was a time for the most bodacious, best-selling Christmas toys ever, like He-Man, G.I. Joe, Transformers,
and Cabbage Patch Kids.
Yes, them too. We cover them all, plus much more, including standard segments like Hap Happiest Memory, Gag Me with the Spoon, The Other Half of the Battle,
and Chant with the Littles.
So tune in to Totally Rad Christmas everywhere you get your podcasts. Turn the clock back and dive into those warm and fuzzy memories.
Later, dudes.
But let's go ahead and get into the moving panels. I mean, you can't make the scene if you don't have the green. Look, I got a quote. There's so many good quotes in this. All right, so let's look at the moving panel. So this was a comic book. It was created by Mike Richardson, who not only created this comic book, he was the founder of Dark Horse Comics. Mm-hmm. He also created Time Cop. Talk about another that if you didn't know that was a comic book movie. Mm-hmm. But I did want to mention it because I know Tim is a fan of Time Cop. I am a fan of Time Cop, yep. So the same guy who created The Mask also created Time Cop. He has gone on record to saying that he was inspired by various characters like the Joker, who, as I mentioned earlier, the Mask did meet up with later. Green Goblin from Marvel. Yeah. Freddy Krueger, who we talked about. Of course, you can't have this without mentioning Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Mm-hmm. And then I'm curious, are you aware of the comic book character, the Creeper?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, I will just say, and this is not the Creeper from Jeepers Creepers, for people who know this. There is a DC character called the Creeper. Pretty much think of, for those of you who would probably know this, think of Freakazoid. He's essentially so he's a very cartoonish type character. but yeah, he's pretty much he's freakazoid. That would be the best way to explain him. But I mean, he comes back from the 60s. He's a creator of Steve Ditko. But yeah, look into that and you'll see the connection of the mask with the creeper. But we have all of those, and of course that gave us this. Now, Richardson originally pitched this idea to Marvel Comics.
Okay.
And they created well, let me actually say it this way. He gave it to a writer at Marvel Comics.
Okay.
And that guy by the name of Mark Badger, he created a comic strip. And he called it Mask, but Masque was the way he titled it. And the thing, though, that Richardson didn't like was that he made it very political. I tried to find some examples of this. I could not find them. I don't know if I just didn't dive deep enough. So I don't know exactly what Badger did, but Richardson went, nope, I'm taking it back. Because he wanted the comic, as the movie kind of shows, he wanted that classic cartoon Tex Avery feel.
Okay, yeah.
You know, for those of you who don't know who Tex Avery, I mean, pretty much the cartoon with the wolf that Stanley watches in the movie, that's Tex Avery.
Yep.
Tex Avery was pretty much one of the main people behind the origin of the Looney Tunes. That's Tex Avery. But he also wanted, and again, this is from Richardson, he wanted it to be a blend of that and the Terminator.
It's an interesting combo.
Gives you an idea of where the comic was going. So it then got turned into an actual comic that appeared in parts in I think it was Dark Horse Presents is the name of the comic, which is a lot of where these Dark Horse thing, like I think Time Cop also appeared in Dark Horse Presents. The Predator, like Alien versus Predator stuff appeared in Dark Horse Presents. So it first appeared in Dark Horse Presents, was kind of an anthology comic. They then later put it all together, into a volume, called it The Mask, and the very first volume is the story of Stanley Ipkiss. So the way this goes is completely different from the movie. The comic opens with Stanley at a shop of some sort, and he is buying the mask.
Okay.
There is no setup. There is no anything. He is buying the mask. And he is buying it as almost like a forgive me gift for his girlfriend, Kathy.
Okay.
We later find out that probably Stanley is kind of an abusive boyfriend.
Okay.
Again, completely different character here.
Right.
And as he's leaving the shop with the mask, he is almost run over by a biker gang. After they pass, he yells at them, curses at them, kind of the same way that he reacts to his landlady at the beginning. Like he can't say it right in front of her, but as soon as she's out, he says the thing about the witch or whatever his line is. And then, but they hear him, so they come back and they beat him up. And so, that's kind of how we're introduced to Stanley. He then goes home. He gives the mask to his girlfriend. She loves it. Apparently she has some sort of mask collection and puts it with her collection. But like I said, completely different here. It ends up getting to a point where he ends up putting on the mask. Well, he finds the mask one night in the bathroom. He doesn't know why it's there. He's thinking that Kathy put it there to frighten him. So he thinks in return he's going to put the mask on and then frighten her. And of course he puts the mask on, and they do it in the mirror of the bathroom. So like medicine cabinet mirror. So again, a similar thing here, because he looks in the mirror when he does it. But he puts the mask on, and let's just say that Stanley does not decide to become the superhero that or the anti-hero, whatever you want to call him, that he is in this movie. He is straight up the villain. Stanley is a psychopath. And he comes up with a list of people who have done him wrong. Okay. And that of course starts off with the biker gang. And he proceeds to go and murder them. Just straight up murders all of them. as we mentioned earlier, there is the scene with the mechanics. But the difference in the comic book is that Stanley murders them. Shoves the muffler down the guy's throat.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the other guy that he strings up, with the engine chain lift. And then as the panel shows, he has apparently just shoved a whole bunch of tools into the guy's head. So kind of picture Pinhead, but it's a bunch of mechanic tools sticking out. Straight up, the man even murders his old elementary school teacher because she embarrassed him when he was a kid. He like curb stomps her.
Gosh.
In front of the class that she's currently teaching. Yeah, this is not
So this
you would not have thought this was turned into this movie.
So this comic's not for kids, what you're telling me?
Absolutely not. No way. Yeah. There's one point where he almost hits Kathy, and then he realized, oh, this mask is doing something horrible to me. The murders didn't make him think that, but he decides to try to get rid of it. But then he remembers a dude owes him $60. And so, he puts the mask back on and he goes and murders that dude. But then he kills cops who were just doing their job in this comic. Of course, he starts, this is where he gets called Big Head. He becomes the Big Head Killer. And of course, the cop, which Kellaway is the main cop that's after him.
Right.
Just like in the movie. However, in the comic, I will say Kellaway's a little bit more of the comic cop. Like he's a little bit more chiseled and
gotcha.
Bigger dude. Looks like he was probably in the military. But it ends with Stanley coming back home. He takes off the mask. He throws it down. And then he is shot in the back by Kathy.
Oh,
and he is killed.
All right, then.
Thus ends Stanley Ipkiss. Stanley Ipkiss is murdered at the beginning of the run of The Mask. So Stanley only existed in a few issues. And so you wonder, so then who is the Mask for the rest of it? Well, for the most part, it's Kellaway.
Oh, really?
Yes. So what ends up happening is Kathy, now I didn't mention this, Kathy actually put on the mask in order to kill Stanley.
Okay.
Because they do this thing, kind of like they show a little bit in the movie, where apparently the mask can just make weapons appear. Like they kind of joke about it, like they have like a flamethrower, and then there's a line that's like, where did this flamethrower come from? And so I think that she put on the mask so that the shotgun that she ends up killing Stanley with just appears. But she takes the mask off. She then takes it to Kellaway, trying to explain everything to Kellaway. Of course, he doesn't believe her. And then he ends up, just for fun, puts the mask on, and then he kind of becomes the anti-hero. He becomes the, hey, I'm gonna these criminals who we can't get by being straight cops, I'm going after them for real. And it is actually Kellaway who does the balloon animal scene.
Oh, really?
Yes. So that is from the comic, almost word for word.
Oh, wow.
In the comics, like the giraffe, the poodle, and then my personal favorite, Tommy gun. Like that is almost exact. Of course, the difference is that he then shoots everybody to death.
Right.
Yeah, that's the big difference. But yeah, that essentially your first what is collectively called The Mask, not The Mask Returns, which is when Kellaway then becomes the character. But the Stanley Ipkiss story is about a guy who gets this mask and it goes on a psychopathic murdering spree. So again, let me ask you this. Could you have seen this as a horror movie?
Yeah, I mean, I could, but I think it wouldn't be very unique. Like it seems like, I mean, a little bit of a twist, but it just becomes not a slasher, but almost that kind of maniac cop is what I'm kind of thinking of. That like type of horror movie. If they, and once again, I haven't read the comic, but if they're adding the comedy element in it, that would give it a little bit more of a. If it's more campy, I guess that might have worked somewhat. But I mean, Yeah, it's a completely different movie than what we have, but I could see it going that way.
So what do you think would have been better if they were more true to the comics? To do the Stanley Ipkiss story where he becomes a killer, or to do the Kellaway story where he becomes a vigilante, like the Punisher, but cartoonish?
Well, I wonder if you could combine both and just make almost Act 1 being Ipkiss, kind of shorten that story to kind of see how it gets to Keller, and
that was my reason for saying I would want to see more of Kellaway.
Yeah, Kellaway, yeah.
If they had done The Mask, the first one, as the Stanley story, but again, it would have been the darker, more horror movie aspect where he was the killer, and then transitioned into The Mask 2. And this is me also thinking about the fact that Richardson, the creator, wanted the blend between Tex Avery and the Terminator. It's the same story here. The Terminator is the bad guy in the first movie and then becomes the good guy in the second movie.
Right.
So have that same aspect of Kellaway. And again, this would have had to been a whole different movie, because I don't see Peter Riker playing this character at all.
No.
But having Kellaway then get the mask and he becomes the
true anti-hero.
The anti-hero here. I'd be interested in that. I do not want them to take this movie away, but this is one of those really weird, because could they remake this but do it that way? And do you think people would accept it?
I do. And I only say that because with the success of shows like Invincible and The Boys and even Deadpool, where they've pushed that envelope of being violent and being a comic, that there's an audience for that now. I don't think you had that audience in '94, but I think now, and because there's been some time since that, the Comedy Mask, I think they could do it, and I think they could probably do it pretty well if they kept it closer to the comic version. It'd be interesting.
I mean, we are literally approaching the 30th anniversary of this movie.
Yeah.
So, man, how old does that make you feel? That this almost the 30th anniversary.
Well, seeing as I do a podcast,
I know you do 80s movies all the time. Yeah.
I usually talk about movies that are 40 years or more. So yeah, but
but there's some. Yeah, I don't know. And again, I'm not to poke fun at you at all, but you're a bit older than me.
Yeah.
But there's a difference, I think, in these movies for me, because like I said with this one, I saw this one in theaters, whereas most of the movies for your show, I was too young to see those in theaters.
Right.
So I don't connect the age as much with those movies as I do with these 90s movies.
Yeah.
So
but this one, being 94, it's still kind of like, there's still times where I'm thinking about movies like, oh, that's not 80s. Stuff that came out like 90 and 91 that are like right there on that edge, because I'm thinking about that time of my life. So, but 94, I mean, I had just graduated high school. So that was my years between high school and college. So I was still a kid. So it still makes me feel old.
I also want to throw this out to you, since you're not familiar with the comic books. So in the comic, they do have the connection with the mob, and gangsters. So they do still have that tie-in. And there is one henchman, thug, whatever you want to call it, that becomes kind of Big Head's primary antagonist for the series. Now, again, this is more with Kellaway, because Stanley never had this. This is more with Kellaway. And it's a character called Walter.
Okay.
So imagine the Hulk or Solomon Grundy, but he's a gangster. This guy, huge goon, that was nearly impossible to kill. I mean, they shoot him in this. He gets stabbed. He gets blown up. He is burned. Once he comes back from being burned, he's just all scarred up, but he is still coming. There is one page where he's talking, his boss is talking with him, and he is just sitting there with a knife, just driving it into his cheek. And every time the next panel cuts to him, it's closer and closer, showing the knife in his, like he's just cutting it right into his cheek. And that's this character. What's funny is, again, he becomes the main antagonist. At the end of The Mask Strikes Back, Kellaway and Kathy she becomes the main character as well. Walter ends up with them, and Kellaway just says, I can't remember if it's Kellaway or Kathy, but one of them just says, fine, here. And they give him the mask. And he goes to put it on, and there's a shot. Now remember, this guy is huge. And you see the mask just sitting in the middle of his giant head. And then it just falls. It doesn't work. And there's no explanation as to why. I don't know if you're supposed to just imply it's too small for his face, or if there's a deeper kind of story here.
Yeah. I would wonder if if it only worked for those who aren't already evil. But again, that doesn't work in the movie version with the gangster. But
yeah, so I will go ahead and throw this out. So I've already mentioned Stanley uses it, Kathy uses it, Kellaway uses it. Well, when it gets into the later issues, there is a run in which, so at the beginning of The Mask Strikes Back, I believe it is, Kellaway you think is murdered, and these gangsters who were after him, because again he's this cop who has been taking down the mob. They find the mask. They jokingly put it on their driver, who is this timid, scared little dude. They put it on him. He ends up then becoming kind of the head of the mob because with the power of the mask, he's pretty much indestructible. So they do that story. Then there's even this story where the mask ends up in the hands of some like thuggish kids, and we get like a punk rock version of the mask. We get like a rock and roll version of the mask. We get a stoner version of the mask. And then this one really smart kid puts it on, and we actually get a superhero version of the mask.
Okay.
So they've been jumping around, which is what I think the original idea was to making it something that could be passed along, making it more of an anthology, maybe like franchise. But then when this Walter character, who has been battling it out with the mask this entire time, goes to put it on, it does not work. And that is something that, again, never explained. But it is a very interesting thing.
Yeah.
I will say this, and now we're not going to talk about this in great detail, but for those of you who remember the animated series, Kellaway looks a little bit more like his character from the comics in that, and Walter is a character in the animated series. So anybody who's thinking about the animated series, yes, you do know who Walter is. He is in the animated series, but never in the movies. But there you have it. So there was Walter. And I'd love to see Walter in a live action version, to be honest. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. Final decision, bag it, stack it, or trade it. Go ahead, Tim. What say you?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking about this one today. I think this one is a stack it. It's good. It's one that I enjoy watching. It's not the greatest comic book movie. It doesn't hit all those boxes for me where I'd want to bag it, but it's still enjoyable. I'm not going to trade it. I mean, that's still one that I enjoy watching. Just not one I'm going to watch very often, but every couple of years, it's fun to put it in and have a rewatch with it.
Okay. Quick question. Now that you know a little bit more about the comic, would you be interested in actually reading the comic now?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, the comic is completely different, and no, it is not for children.
Yeah. I'd have to be. I'd have to be in the mood to read it. I don't think it'd be one. No.
Yeah, when I rewatched this, I actually watched it with Ruby. She's 10, approaching 11, and I had no problem with that at all.
Yeah.
I mean, there is some more adult things, but it's almost like those great movies of this time.
Yeah.
Of where some of the adult things just go right over a little kid's head.
Exactly.
And that the stuff that it's got a good little balance. Yes, it is PG-13. So say what you will, but I don't think it's that bad. The comic though, no. The comic book is an adult read. They do kind of they do avoid the profanity. They actually use the asterisk hashtag,
Gotcha.
All that for the profanity.
Mm-hmm.
But the graphic nature of the comic is big. But I will say that I thought about stack it, but I decided to officially go bag it on this. I mean, it is prime Jim Carrey, as we talked about earlier. Yeah. This is the Jim Carrey everybody remembers. But I also think it's considering that, yes, the comic is dark, I think this movie works just as well as a representation of the comic as Batman 66 did.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah. I mean, if they made the darker version, we said this earlier, it would not be as loved. I don't think it would not be as successful. It would not be one that we think fondly of. It would not have reached as big of an audience as this one did.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, I mean, this was again, I was in middle school officially when this came out. And I want to say the year it came, so 1994, it came out in July. That Halloween, I was the mask for Halloween. I remember it was at Walmart. They actually sold latex, full head masks.
Yeah, I remember those. Yeah.
I had one. I still have one. It's actually down in my basement. It is on a little foam head, nicely displayed. But I had that, and I had this Tommy Hilfiger shirt that I wore. You want to talk about 90s?
Yeah,
here.
exactly.
This was a t-shirt. This was a button-up shirt where half of the shirt was solid blue and the other half shirt was plaid.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a zany looking shirt, and so that's why I wore it with my mask. Yes, very, very 1994. And I wore that with my mask, and yeah, I was a huge fan of the mask and still am, to be honest. And that's why I had to say bag it. I think that and you talked about it doesn't hit all the same things that a comic book movie usually does with you. I think part of that goes with the fact that people don't realize it's a comic book.
Yeah.
And yes, it's not exactly like the comic book, but I think when you're not aware it's a comic book, that's different than when you are aware it's a comic book in terms of the way you experience it. So, yeah, if you are interested, go out, find the comic, read the comic. It's a good read. I ain't going to lie. It's a good read. And, it's not one of those that I think you're going to be upset, but do expect something very different from the movie. But we'll go ahead and wrap things up here. Thank you, Tim.
Yes, sir.
For joining me on this. Always a pleasure to get your expertise when it comes to breaking down movies. And this was a fun one. I love The Mask.
Yeah.
I really do. I do love The Mask, and it was fun to get to do some studying and rewatch this one. And you know what? I didn't say this. This was my first time reading the comics. Preparing for this show.
Yeah.
So I had always wanted to and just never had. So this gave me a reason to, and I'm glad I did it. But thanks everybody for listening. Go out, rate, review the show. And we hope you enjoy the rest of your summer here, and stay tuned with us, whether you're on vacation or whether you're just sitting around relaxing by the pool. Give us a listen and enjoy the stuff we're going to be talking about. Tim, you got anything coming up here in the later days of June and into July?
Ooh, yeah. So July is going to be fun. We're going to do we're going to do The Right Stuff, which is an 80s movie that I've actually never seen before. It's one that I've heard a lot about.
I've never seen it either.
Yeah, so been recommended by a few people that we needed to cover it for the podcast, and 4th of July seemed like a good time to do that one, so we're going to do that in July. I'm really excited about August. August is action-packed August, so I've got
theme month.
Yes, a theme month. So there are actually there's actually 5 Fridays in August, so I'm gonna have a new episode every Friday that month. And we're going to hit all the action stars of the 80s. So I've got Tango and Cash with Stallone. Some of the lesser known, maybe not the big blockbusters, but still good ones. Cyborg with Van Damme. The Running Man with Schwarzenegger, which is another based on a book, which I'm sure
Stephen King.
We'll dig into. and Masters of the Universe with Dolph Lundgren, which several of the co-hosts are very excited about going over that movie again. So yeah, gonna have a lot, and then we're doing the Delta Force with Chuck Norris. So action-packed August. So I'm really looking forward to that one.
Yeah, I guess Bruce Willis didn't really come in until the end of the 80s. He was more of a 90s action star. Yeah, that's true.
Yep.
So, and I've already done Die Hard with you on your show.
Yeah,
I think we had
that's the only 80s action movie he would have done. But yeah. So I was trying to stay with the true 80s who were considered 80s action stars.
Yeah. I will give you that. You are correct. I was really sitting here going, what Bruce Willis movie is he doing? And then I realized, oh yeah. Yeah, there's really not Bruce Willis. That's more of a 90s.
Blind Date didn't fall into the action category. I tried.
No, yeah. It doesn't fall into action.
Or Sunset.
All right. Well, thanks. Yeah. Well, it's a Western action-ish. Hollywood Western action-ish. Yeah. That would be stretching it.
From world-acclaimed action director Blake Edwards. Yeah.
Yes. I see nothing wrong with this. All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Rate and review the show. But we'll wrap things up for today. For Moving Panels, I'm Laramy Wells, and I'll see you on the other side of the page.